This panel will be divided in three parts. So the first part will contain Ukrainian voices. I will soon invite them on stage. And we will get a better understanding of what's actually happening in Ukraine right now. The situation for individual artists, for cultural institutions, for the cultural field in general. After this, we will invite three speakers representing the Swedish side, Swedish culture, responding and giving us also an understanding of how the Swedish cultural scene has changed and adapted itself to a full-scale war in Ukraine, to supporting a neighboring European society where artists and cultural institutions and the cultural heritage is in danger right now. And then we will conclude with a discussion, including both the voices from the Ukrainian side and the Swedish side on the future, with two perspectives. The perspective of this ongoing conflict, which is getting more serious. The situation for artists and for cultural institutions is getting more serious. They are more in danger along with the deepening of this conflict, prolongation of this conflict. But we will also look to the future that we're all hoping for. The future when we start reconstructing Ukraine together. Ukrainian society with the support of the European societies, companies, governments, when we're building a new Europe after this war, and the cultural dimension of that process. So this is what we will talk about during today. Technical question, when do we expect to get Mr. Tkachenko online? He is online? In a couple of minutes. Okay, so then I would like to invite our Ukrainian speakers on stage. And our first speaker is Anastasia Cherednichenko, who is a historian and who is also the chair of ICOM Ukraine.
Yep.
Welcome to this discussion.
Thank you.
And Vachtan Kebuladze, who is a writer, philosopher, translator, and a professor of the Taras Shevchenko University in Kiev. Here. And with us will also be Mr. Tkachenko, Alexander Tkachenko, the current Minister of Culture of Ukraine, who will be joining us via a link. And we will adopt the first part a little bit to Mr. Tkachenko's availability, so when I get a signal that he's with us online, we will include him in the discussion. And at this moment, I would like to ask Anastasia to give us your own introduction, the messages you would like to give us from a complex environment, because of course we will never summarize the full scale of the situation for artists and culture, but some insights into the situation we're seeing right now.
Okay, thank you so much for having me. And right now I want to ask about my little presentation, please. Don't be afraid. It's not so big. First of all, I would like to explain what, for broader public, what ECOM is. It's not so funny like before panel was. ICOM, it's International Council of Museum, and I am chair of National Committee of Ukraine. And right now, this is part of my job, take me a lot of time. Also, I don't have time for my historian researchers or the other activities that I did before. Also, another my job, it's in a museum complex art arsenal, so I know what is going on this culture environment inside. So, what I want to say that Russia is conducting war with Ukrainian identity. Next, please. And besides the fact that cities are being destroyed and Ukrainian territory is being occupied, cultural heritage is also being destroyed and illicitly transferred. I can give you some examples. Next, please. You can see destroyed absolutely Mariupol with museums. That's of course. Next, please. Part of museum collection from Melitopol, it's almost whole museum collection was moved by Russians, and also museum collection.
Just to be precise, it has been moved to an unknown location inside Russia.
I am going to say about this. Also, next please, collection were taken from Melitopol museums, it's gold, Kisian gold, Kherson museums, next please, Kakhovka museum. So from Kherson, it's very well known examples. There were looting both museums, art and local history museums with 5 branches, and they had rich collections. And I would like to stress that. And for example, from Kherson, next please, from Kherson museums, they moved to Crimea and in Tavrida Museum. But we know that such examples that were before, that from Crimea, it's moved to precisely to Russia. We have Crimean Strategy Institute, and they researched this question from 2014. So many of items and museum objects from Crimean museums and Donetsk and Luhansk occupied territory museums, they were transferred to Russia. So it's absolutely possible that after the Crimea, our Ukrainian museums will move to Russia. Next please. Through this, and next please. Through this war, the Ukrainian Museum Fund, from 2014, was reduced by at least at 20%. And next please. Russian museum experts so involved in this. They, in this illegal transfer, they estimate, they actually do some expertise for this, so we cannot tell that it's only Putin and politicians, and also we can say that it's by chance. It's actually politics in high state level, but Russian experts involved in this and they implement this politics. Next please. They also doing some propaganda exhibitions. I can give you an example. Yes, it was in summer in Moscow Museum, Victor Museum. It was exhibition regular Nazism about Ukraine, but not only we are Nazis, they also have exhibition regular Nazism, so NATO plus Nazism. And they also use some items from Mariupol, so museum experts, in the museum regular activity use items from completely destroyed city. And I also can suggest you, if you didn't before, to read the interview of Petrovsky. This is a director of the famous Russian Museum of Hermitage, and this is an interview also translated in English. It's quite interesting. Next, please. And another perspective, for for me, it's the most important perspective, and the most important points. It's people, of course. Of course, I'm an expert and professional, and I cannot say in this way about culture heritage, but for me, people, the most valuable. Ukrainian people also being killed as a carriers of identity. We know about lists from Russians who actually must be exterminated in the temporarily occupied territory. We know about mass graves with bodies with national and patriotic symbols and tattoos. And also, under the Great Street, those who preserve identity, history, and stories on professional levels. I am talking about museum experts, museum staff, and in the temporary occupied territory, they are under constant pressure. They are kidnapped. I also can give you an example. In March, in Melitopol city was kidnapped director of a local history museum, Leila Ibrahimova. But she was lucky, she is Crimean Tatar, and Crimean journalist raised her question in the some. Sorry, I don't remember what it was about, but he asked about her Lavrov, and after she was interrogated in 5 hours, something like that, she was released. And she managed to escape. However, it's not so easy because her relatives in Melitopol, they play a role of hostage. Right now, she not able to talk anything what is going on in Melitopol because from secret services of Russians or FSB, she came to her house and I don't know to threat their relatives. So if she started talking about, so you know what is happening. And I know I keep in touch with my museum colleagues, of course, all this time. And I know that in the Melitopol Museum also were kidnapped some museum staff. They were asked about museum collection, about Scythian hold. What actually was moved from museum.
Anastasia, we will come back to you more in the discussion. I'm very thankful for you for pointing out a few, I think, very key points in this discussion, that there is a coherent strategy from the Russian side implemented. There is a policy implemented where looting is systematic, it's not random, it's a systematic looting. There are prepared lists, as we know, that come with the occupation forces, and they are targeted both at academia, at civil society, at parts of the defense, of course, but it's also including cultural workers, as you said, and museum workers. And they are either being abducted from the very start of the occupation, or they are found by security services or other servicemen during the occupation, and some of them have disappeared and been kidnapped. And these are extremely important. So I think it's very important that we, from the very beginning of this discussion, keep in mind that we're not talking about the war destruction of national heritage, of cultural symbols that occurs because of shelling, because of the bombardment of Ukrainian cities, but a systematic attack on Ukrainian culture. And I'm very glad, Anastasia, that you gave us this. Julia, what is the status on our connection with Kiev?
We received new information
Yes?
that the Minister of Ukraine, Culture Minister of Ukraine, will join us at 15:30.
Okay.
So please go ahead.
Then we go ahead, and then we will include Mr. Tkachenko in the conversation when he's available. We understand that his availability is we'll have it when we have it. Vakhtang, if you continue showing this picture to us listening here today, what would you stress in this current situation?
First of all, I would like to explain probably the first part of the topic, and it is a question why we should support the Ukrainian culture now, because now it's a danger for all of us in Ukraine, for our lives, for our houses, and is it really important to support culture in this situation? I would say yes, because we struggle and we fight not only for our territory. Yeah, of course we are fighting for our territory. We are fighting for the lives of our people, but we also fight for our style of life. And it is a European style of life, and the values of freedom, of dignity, human rights are very important for us. I said about that on the first discussion, during the first discussion, that the name of our revolution, it was a starting point of the new wave of Russian aggression, was revolution of dignity. And one of the main slogans
In 2014,
in 2014.
Yeah.
The beginning of this war, it wasn't years ago, it was 2014. And one of the main slogans of our revolution of dignity was freedom is our religion. So, and that's why we are fighting, as I say, not only for the territory and for the lives here, of course, for the lives of our people, but we are fighting for our style of life and for our culture. And another very crucial point that it's not my idea. I had it from well-known Ukrainian scholar Yaroslav Gritsak. He said to me, and he wrote it in his book, that the great political nations of Western Europe were created by politicians, and the great political nations of the Central Europe were created by poets. On the first image, you saw the monument of Taras Shevchenko, which was destroyed by Russia's shelling. And I think that it's not contingency. Yeah, they destroyed our art objects. They are burning our books. They move our collections from our museums to their territory. I was in this Kherson museum after the occupation, and the people with the tears, the people from these museums who were under the occupation, they with the tears in their eyes, they said about this pressure from the Russian. They tried to hide the collection at first, but it was a pressure on the women who stay there, and the Russia found the collection after that and moved to the territory of Russia. What they do, they try to move our collection. They try to destroy our museums. They try to destroy the universities here, of course. As I said, they bury our books, yeah, from the libraries, Ukrainian books. It's a genocide, it's a cultural genocide, yeah. And they kidnap, tortured, and kill our writers. I know the history, the story about the writer for the child writer, the writer for the children from Izum, it's near from Kharkiv. He's a member of PEN Ukraine, also a member of PEN Ukraine, you know this organization. Volodymyr Vakulenko, he was kidnapped in Izum during the occupation, tortured, killed, and his body was found between Izum and Kharkiv. So Russians do know that they should destroy it, and destroy not only our lives, our houses, but our culture. And I would say that we have one beautiful but very dangerous illusion that politics and economy can be dangerous for the unity of the people. Yeah? It can be very good, it can be cooperation, but it can be dangerous also. And the culture, no. The culture is something creative, the culture can be only good for the unity of the people. It's very dangerous illusion. I said it before this invasion, I said it probably before the beginning of the war, that culture can be the field of struggle. It's not my idea, it's an idea by Edward Said, American scholar. And sometimes some type of culture are dangerous. And I would say that the Russian culture was always dangerous. For example, we discussed also this letter by PEN Germany, we fight against Putin, not against Pushkin. I don't agree with this statement, because Pushkin, his poetry is poetry of hate. Try to read his poem Poltava, or his poem about Poland, or about Georgia. Yeah? It's a poetry of hate, it's a speech of hate. This Russian politics, the new Russian politics, is deeply rooted in Russian poetry and literature. So I would say it's not enough to support Ukrainian culture. If you want to support Ukrainian culture, and if you want to support the culture of our civilization, you should cancel the Russian culture, especially the modern Russian culture. Because the Russian artists who are living in Russia or even in Europe with Russian citizenship, and they say, okay, it's culture, it's not about politics, it's not about war. We are singing, we will love our motherland, yeah, we don't love Putin, but we love Russia. But who is Putin? He is a product of the Russia, and he is a product of Russian culture. We cannot separate these issues. Putin is a product of Dostoevsky, Pushkin, Tolstoy, and for example, probably you don't know this writer from Russia, Akunin. Who knows him? Yeah? Somebody knows, yeah, but he's not very famous here. He's a very good writer. He's a very good translator from Japanese into Russian. He's a very good writer, and he wrote many books about a man from Secret Service Fandorin, who was active in Russia at the beginning of the 20th century. It's very good literature. It's not high literature, but it's very good. Yeah. And now he's in London or in Great Britain. I don't know. He's not in Russia. And I read some days ago, 1 week ago, one post by him. He asked, "What does it mean to be imperialistic writer? Where is the border between the imperialistic literature and not imperialistic literature?" Yeah, but I would say to him that his romans, his novels about Fandorin, he was a representative of Russian secret services at the beginning of the 20th century, and it's like a legend about the very honorable man. Yeah. So it is a legitimation of Putin, yeah, because it's like a projection into the future.
Thank you very much. We have all heard this position. Do you think that sometimes using words as cancelling can be counterproductive for the understanding of the Ukrainian cause? Cancelling a society, cancelling a culture, cancelling linguistic expression in this sense, because I'm totally with you with the rereading of imperialism in Russian culture and the importance of rereading Russian literature and culture in the context of this war and of previous wars. But do you think that using such words as cancelling an entire cultural set of cultural expressions is counterproductive for the understanding of Ukraine?
It can be productive, and not only for Ukraine, for understanding of Ukraine, but for all of us, if we should explain the mode of this cancelling.
Because, I mean, Pushkin is no less imperialistic than many British poets. Should we cancel the British poets who wrote poetry of condescent and imperial rule towards other nations?
I don't agree with you, because in all great literatures, like British literature or German literature, there are many reflections on it, yeah? And there are many critics on these processes. And in Russian literature, can you find it? No.
This was my question, because I agree with you. There is a strong need of a critical discourse of the imperial context.
Yeah. And the second one, so what does it mean to cancel the Russian culture? It is impossible to cancel the culture. But, for example, for me, it's absolutely obvious that, and I'm saying in Ukraine about that, we should learn the Russian culture. So, because we should learn the illness.
I wanted to just make this small diversion so that we leave this topic, because it's not the topic for today. But I want your point to be clear, of course.
So we should learn the Russian culture, the Russian philosophy or Russian religions. I'm saying that it's very important to create the Institute of Russia in Ukraine, probably in Europe also, because we should know our enemy. And probably I said about it in the first discussion, what can Ukraine give the world? We are the best experts in this field. We know Russia very well, and Russian so-called culture. That's why we should be experts in this field. But we should make the Russia and Russian culture, Russian politics, Russian literature the object of the investigation. But, for example, it's very dangerous for Ukraine, and I say that we shouldn't make Russia the subject of discourse. Yeah, it's different. We should learn it. Yeah? We should investigate these roots of illness and dangerous. But it's very dangerous to make Russian writers, Russian singers, Russian artists.
I don't want to deny that this is an important thread in the whole process, but I would like this discussion to focus right now on how this is transferred into the policy that we're seeing on the ground in Ukraine right now, because what we're seeing right now is an aggression towards artists, towards cultural expression.
I will say one example.
But the dealing of Russian, I mean the rereading of Russian culture, it's a really separate discussion.
Okay, I will give you one example, of real politics, so to speak. Do you know this case in Germany, in Wiesbaden, Hessen? This festival, music festival.
I know a lot.
The beginning of this festival should be by Netrebko. Do you know that?
Yes.
Yeah. So why? And they invite two orchestras from Ukraine, and we should say them it's impossible. Our musicians can be in the same festival with this enemy of the mankind.
You understand? Yeah. This discussion is heard and it's debated, and this is what I think the general public hears when it comes to the cultural aspect of this war. The actual destruction of Ukrainian culture on ground is not very well known in other countries. And I think this is what we should focus on today, because I think this is what we really can also have some kind of concrete ideas around.
Can I, to add in your discussion that ICOM of Germany, right, recently they banned ICOM Russia, and it's huge because between Germany and Russia they had so close and have so close relationships. But for us also it was a big surprise. They banned ICOM of Russia. It was their own decision. Of course, we were very close to these colleagues from Germany, and they don't. They banned whole cooperation with Russian museums as well. So it's our stage right now. What we can to show what our museums actually can show in Germany and the other EU countries as well.
I think it's very important to understand also that, of course, the reaction to ban ICOM Russia is the reaction to what you were saying before, that the actual museums in Russia right now and the museum workers are involved in both receiving the looted objects from Ukraine, but also in spreading and showing in the museums the narrative supporting this war. So of course it's, and this is what I would like us to focus on right now, how the policies are being implemented, how the looting is systematic, how the oppression against the cultural workers and artists is on the ground.
We, in Ukraine, ICOM, with our alliance, we right now in the middle of process to launch international monitoring group, and the main goal of this monitoring group to monitor violation by Russian experts, how they involved in this illicit moving museum collections, how it's moving from Ukrainian parts to Crimea, and then what is going on. And also this is monitoring group is going to be about to monitor these propaganda exhibitions and so on and so on. And then we want to bring questions about responsibility, what we should do with them. Of course, it's question about for future court. It's 400%, but we like international organization, we share this responsibility, because right now ICOM Russia is part of this this organization, and we actually didn't anything before, so we gave some clear signals that its behavior it's acceptable.
It's very clear, of course, and specialists in different fields are being used in this very clear implementation of these strategies on the ground. I would like to broaden the discussion now on the Swedish response. We've heard a bit about the situation on the ground in Ukraine, and I would like to invite 3 Swedish speakers to join us. And it's Amanda Lind, who most of you know as the former Minister for Culture and Democracy in Sweden, and now the chairperson of the Committee of Cultural Affairs of the Swedish Parliament. Welcome on stage, Amanda. Susanna Pettersson, the Director General of Nationalmuseum, the Swedish National Museum, and also Sweden's representative in the UNESCO Emergency Group for Museums in Ukraine, which is very important for this context. Please welcome her on stage. And Susanne Thedéen, Deputy Director General of the Swedish National Heritage Board, which is also very important in this context. And we're very glad that you 3 joined us here today. And Amanda, I will, because I've asked them also to give us an entrance point on what's being done from their perspective, how the full-scale invasion of Ukraine has changed what we do and how we work in Sweden from their point of view, their perspective. So we will listen to their entrance points, and then we will have a discussion, and we will see when the Minister of Culture of Ukraine will join us online. Amanda, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And first of all, I would like to say that I'm very glad to be here and mostly to listen to your perspectives. I'm very also looking forward to listen to the Minister of Culture, because in my view, I mean, this Russian invasion of Ukraine is something that has been going on for so long time now, for almost a year. And you described it as both that this is a disaster, of course, for human lives and this whole situation in Ukraine, but that it is also a culture of genocide. I think that was strong words, and in a good way describes what is going on here. From my perspective, since now I am in opposition in the parliament, and when the invasion started, I was outside the parliament, and because the Green Party had left the government right then. But of course, together with all my political colleagues, we reacted strongly when the invasion was a fact. I think that it happened lots of things from the cultural politicians and also from the authorities that we will listen more to here. And we have also, I see in the audience, representatives from the Swedish Arts Council that I know was one part that made effort to coordinate action taken towards both support the Ukrainian parts, cultural parts in Ukraine, but also for supporting artists that fled from Ukraine and support them for giving a safe haven here in Sweden. But when we see this acute phase, we can mobilize a lot of energy and also a lot of money and decisions. But now when we have this more like a phase that has going on for so long time, then I believe that we have to take a new perspective now and take a new stand in how we can support Ukraine in a more long-term way. I mean, of course, we all want that this brutal invasion will end, but we have to be prepared for the situation going on for quite a long time now. And we have to see that the efforts taken from the Swedish cultural authorities and also from the politicians are enduring, I think we can say. We have to make them solid for working for a long time. We cannot depend on private civil society initiatives. They are really good, but we have to have this strength and coordination from, in my view, from the authorities. From my perspective, I think that I will mention three concrete actions I think that we should do from the Swedish policy makers. First of all, I think it's important that we secure the living conditions in Sweden for those from Ukraine that lives here, both the asylum seekers and also the artists that has come here to work in residencies or the safe haven programs. I think we have to evaluate the efforts that has taken so far. Do we need more money to the system? Do we have to have longer periods for the residencies for Ukrainian artists? Do we have to strengthen the collaboration between different parts so that the Ukrainian artists can come out with their art? Because we know that this is important for both for them to work and for the Swedish us who are the receivers of the culture. And we know that collaborations is also a way to strengthen the cultural parts in different ways. And that is something I think that the government can take action to do in the coming budgets, of course, to make special funding for that. I also want to emphasize that when we have these I think the relevant authorities that now are, I know, preparing a coordinated, both Sweden and EU effort to support this preservation, the protect and the development of the cultural lives in Ukraine. I think that the Swedish government should task relevant authorities to make this coordinated, this increased coordination, because I think that will be needed. We know that there is a huge need of both funding but also expertise and people, technical expertise, people going to Ukraine and support support on ground. And I think that it's important that not every authority is doing their thing, every civil society is doing their thing, and that will be lots of separate actions. We have to have this coordination. And I believe that the needs are so big. And we know that the cultural heritage and the supporting of free actors and the free culture, this is only one part. And I'm afraid that this will be forgotten when we see all the other needs that is going to have to be coordinated from both the Swedish authorities but also from the EU. And for the third thing, I think that the Swedish government should use its now EU chair position that we have to shed light and of the importance of rebuilding the cultural sector. This is an important role that the Swedish government right now has to shed light on this situation, because it's also so easy that these things are forgotten, and the conflicts in the world and also the Swedish situation. I will say that I'm really sorry that the Swedish discussion much more tend to be about how we in Sweden build ourselves to handle a future crisis. But I mean, there is an ongoing crisis now in Ukraine that we cannot forget. So it's really important that the government is taking their responsibility to shed light on the situation now.
Thank you very much, Amanda. Susanne, I mean, must feel excruciating listening to Anastasia when you're yourself the director of a museum collection, to see the destruction of collections in this sense. What would you say is the situation right now from your point of view?
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for the wise words that you shared with all of us. I might be wearing two hats in this conversation. One, and I start with the first one, which is Associate Professor in Museology. Now going to, let's say, the role of cultural heritage historically, how it has been used throughout the different centuries, especially in terms of crisis and conflict and war. And secondly, I will come to my real job, being Director General, and also I'm also going to talk a little bit about the work within UNESCO.
Yeah.
So I think that what I thought to say relates directly what you earlier presented, now showing us images on the ongoing situation in Ukraine, how the museum collections have been destroyed, looted, stolen, taken elsewhere. And this long tradition of using the collections in this way, looting them, collections being vandalized, goes actually to the very beginning of the tradition of collecting, because collecting of objects was also collecting knowledge. Objects and knowledge translate into identity. And what we're talking about, the history of collections, not only, let's say, well, it applies to all the countries and regions, so that we are talking about issues that go directly to identity, memories, shared stories. And once these collections are being attacked, then our memories are attacked, our stories are taken away. And that's why cultural heritage is so in danger zone when we're talking about crises and war. And you were referring to that what happens to the nation, and even on the artist level, when artists are kidnapped and killed. So once we are talking about cultural heritage, we are all the time talking about power, and we're talking about politics. So the culture is it's never an isolated island somewhere. And that's something we should take on board. Then I thought that I would say some words about that how we can deal with this cultural heritage issue then. If it's in danger, we have the objects, we have the knowledge, and then we should be thinking about how we sort of document the cultural heritage in cases where it's in danger. And of course, there are lots of tools for that. That's also something that has been known already during the, let's say, the Second World War. People working within culture research and history were sent to the forefront to document, let's say, architecture or collections. For instance, my grandfather, who was an art historian during the Second World War, his task was to document all the wooden churches in Eastern Karelia that at the time belonged to Finland. I'm Finnish, by the way, so belonged to Finland. And nowadays, those materials are the only remaining documents of that part of cultural heritage. The same is happening in Ukraine as we speak. Last night I corresponded with our contact person from the UNESCO emergency group from museums in Ukraine, and she sent the latest update of the statistics that they are terrible, terrible reading. UNESCO founded this special group rather quickly after the war had started, inviting 13 museum professionals in different countries, and all the major institutions are represented in the group. I'm the only representative from the Nordic countries, and our task is to help UNESCO and via UNESCO Ukrainian museums with partly questions that are related to the current situation. What can we do right now in terms of to support the evacuation activities, to help with the documentation and safekeeping of the collections, and then we are also working with the future-orientated questions like rebuilding, reconstructing the country, etc. But the stats, they show that as of 15 February this year, UNESCO has verified damage to 240 sites, 105 religious sites, 18 museums, 86 buildings of historical and of artistic interest, 19 monuments, 12 libraries. And this is, we all understand that these numbers are devastating. Yes. So what I thought that I would like to ask to take on board from this panel discussion is a little bit on the same line as you were just saying, Amanda, that we need to be able to invest in long-term solutions. This work needs lots of resources, lots of skills, lots of expertise, and we need to be able to use all our international networks in order to get the community together and invest in rebuilding the cultural heritage, because that's not only worth it, but it's necessary. And we were talking about values and the values of humankind, and once we are talking about what's happening to the cultural heritage in Ukraine at the moment, we should all the time keep in mind that it's our culture heritage that we really have to fight for.
Thank you. Susanne.
Thank you. I'm also very glad to be invited here. This is a very important day for me to be here. I was very moved by your testimony of the persecution of individuals protecting the cultural heritage and the systematic destruction and looting of the cultural heritage in Ukraine. That was very strong, and your word of it as culture genocide, that is a concept or an expression I will bring from this day. That is what it's all about. I represent the Swedish National Board here in Sweden, and we have, since the start of the war, used various approaches to draw attention to and communicate the threat to and damage of the cultural heritage in Ukraine. We have also taken a number of initiatives to support different kinds of cultural institutions in Ukraine, and we have done this together with cultural institutions here in Sweden. One very early measure was to establish contact and dialogue with the museum director at the National Museum of the History of Ukraine in Kiev. One other early measure was to highlight the severe threat to the cultural heritage in Ukraine by a joint communication of the head of the Heritage Board and the former Minister of Culture, not Amanda though, in Sweden, in one of the big newspapers here in Sweden. We have also been involved in the statements from the European Heritage Heads Forum that condemns Russia's invasion of Ukraine, pointing out the risk of destruction of cultural heritage and demanding that Russia respect international conventions for the protection of cultural heritage. This forum meets on a regular basis to discuss the need for support and what actions and measures to take.
Susanne, we might be interrupting with Kiev any moment. I'm just, Julia, what is the status right now? So we will continue with your presentation, Susanne, and then at some point we will let him.
Yeah, it will only.
Then, if you have some points, we will take them.
Yes.
Think them later.
Fine, but we need to do more than talk. The Heritage Board has also set up a national focal point for coordination of activities related to Ukrainian cultural heritage and museums. The focal point has and will handle requests from the Swedish Authority of Crisis Preparedness, from the European Union Civil Protection Mechanism. One example of coordination of activities is the request for different kind of museum-related equipment and materials, where we have organized the supply from Swedish museums and cultural institutions to support our sister institutions in Ukraine. Not only destruction of cultural heritage have been seen, but also looting and illicit trade. And we stand in contact with entities handling illicit trade of cultural objects. And the Heritage Board has sent a letter to dealers in antiquities in Sweden, making them aware of the emergency red list of cultural objects from Ukraine announced by ICOM, the International Council of Museums. And this red list consists of cultural objects and cultural heritage, archaeological objects, books and manuscripts, religious items and fine arts. We have also monitored and coordinated ongoing and new initiatives on the national level. Among them is the fundraising for Ukraine's national cultural heritage initiative of great importance. It was launched already last spring and is administered by the Nordic Museum Foundation. The support will contribute to securing collections and the work of rebuilding the museums in Ukraine as soon as possible. Swedish research foundations have also granted money to a major research project with the purpose of investigating relations between the Nordic area and the Kiev area in prehistoric and early historical times. Hopefully, this research can contribute to prevent the use of history and fake news in the future. A consequence of the Russian invasion of an independent nation close to Sweden's territory is the immediate response to activate and strengthen the awareness of the power of heritage and possible threats to cultural heritage also in Sweden. Therefore, we have intensified our collaborations with museums, archives, libraries, and other stakeholders to strengthen preparedness for protect cultural heritage also here in Sweden. Today, I hope we can have a discussion of areas of need for further support, major support for a long period of time. One such area might be related to the EU recommendation to 3D scan all monuments and sites with cultural heritage at risk, as well as the most physically visited cultural and heritage monuments. This was launched after the fire of Notre Dame in Paris a few years ago. And finally, the question of what support will be of most significance in rebuilding the cultural heritage sites in Ukraine, hopefully in the near future.
Thank you very much, Susanne Tidén. Thank you. And let's connect with Kyiv. Mr. Tkachenko, do you hear us? Hello from Stockholm. One moment, please, sir. We're trying to get the technique to work. Yes?
So, do you hear me now?
Yes, now we can hear you loud and clearly. Welcome to the discussion.
Thank you very much for organizers to give me a floor. Probably it's quite symbolic that you organize this event on the day of commemoration of 100 Heavenly, the day which the Revolution of Dignity finished successfully, but at the same time it was the start of Ukrainian-Russian war, which continues with full-scale invasion almost 1 year ago. And it's important to mention culture because we're fighting also for our identity, which represent culture heritage. Our task is to make Ukrainian culture sound powerful everywhere, because we are fighting for not only identity but values. In today's circumstances, Ukrainian culture is adapting to the realities of the war. Thanks to representatives of media, cinema, music and other spheres, Ukraine is already revealing our unity, our courage in the fight for freedom and values in which we live to the world community. For example, fashion brands refocused on the production of items for the Ukrainian army. Artists, writers, actors, musicians, theater workers arrange tours, artistic and literary events, collecting funds to support Ukraine. During the war, there were more than 50 premieres in Ukrainian theaters. IT specialists are working on blocking Russian government and propaganda sites. Ukrainian creative hubs and libraries act as volunteer centers and host internationally displaced people. Ukrainian culture has become an important part of the national resistance and plays an important and unifying role for Ukrainian people. On the other hand, we are facing many challenges because currently more than 500 monuments of culture heritage have been destroyed or damaged. More than 1,200 cultural institutions have been destroyed or damaged, and advertisement market has fallen more than 65%. 20% of artists have gone abroad, so there is a problem of outflow of professional labor resources and its deprofilization. In June-July 2022, as part of preparations for international conference on the restoration of Ukraine in Lugano, our ministry developed the plan for restoration of Ukraine. Despite the limited opportunities due to national-wide martial law, the Ukrainian culture community ensures the stability of the development of Ukrainian culture and its spread abroad through its own activities. At the same time, the implementation of this project requires international technical assistance, grant assistance from international organizations, public and charitable organizations. We are very much grateful for partners for help. The European Commission has created a special grant program for Ukrainian artists, culture organizations and institutions in amount of 5 million euros. It's part of Creative Europe program for 2023, and I hope that today in Berlin it will be another international initiative to help Ukrainian cinema will be announced. The main priorities for 2023 culture of sustainability are follows. Voice of Ukraine in the world. This is what we mean by large-scale exhibition projects of Ukrainian art in Germany, Great Britain, Italy, Austria, the Netherlands and France. Continuation of touring activities of artistic groups abroad. Eurovision in Liverpool under the Ukrainian flag, street actions, exhibition and multimedia projects. 2023 Year of Ukrainian Culture in Moldova. Organization and holding the International Forum Creative Ukraine, Seasons of Ukrainian Culture in European countries, Ukrainian Biennale. On the cultural front, its implementation of the project Ukrainian Youth European Book, restoration of library funds of culture and educational institutions was opportunity to read foreign books in the original language. Tales of EU-Ukraine project, printing more than 300,000 bilingual children books by Ukrainian authors abroad and distribution of these books in schools and kindergartens abroad where Ukrainian children study together with foreign children. Recovery of investment in creative industries and deployment, holding the Festival of Folk and Craft Ukrainian brand. 3. Implementation of digital project, which is very much important for us to not only preserve Ukrainian culture, heritage, but creation and fill in the register of master of folk and crafts. And fundraising. We initiated the idea about a cumulative of 1% of culture from the budgets of ministers of culture of EU and G7 countries, attracting international technical assistance and grant funds, in particular within the framework of the Talents for Ukraine charity fund of Kiev, a School of Economic Program, $1 million, USAID Competitive Economy of Ukraine, 36 million hryvnias, and development and entrepreneurship for the implementation of measures aimed for supporting and restoration business, 1 million hryvnia, implementation of the project supporting Ukrainian government reforms, Sergey and others. 5. Support of creative industries, implementation of a project to train representatives of creative industries in international market competence, support and development of project in field of culture, creative industries with support of Ukrainian Culture Fund. And of course, fight against disinformation. It's not only a huge number of initiatives we created last year, but also a call to for informational Rammstein of G7 and EU countries. I consider it necessary to cooperate on the development of long-term and mutually beneficial partnership, the implementation of joint projects, the development of mechanism for the return of creative professionals to Ukraine. Very much believe in any type of collaboration. I believe in strengthening cooperation with Sweden on the cultural front, and thank you very much for helping Ukraine and resist Russian aggression. Slava Ukraini!
Thank you very much for joining us. If I may, our Swedish speakers, do you have any questions? If we have an opportunity to ask one or two things at this point. We are right now trying to understand how to help in this moment of crisis. We are also trying to look forward to a future when we will have a sovereign and free Ukraine, and we will start as neighbors in Europe the reconstruction of Ukraine after this war. From these two different perspectives, what would you stress? You've been outlining, but if you would, the full scale of the needs and the situation, but if you would stress a few points on the need that could come from Sweden, from these two different perspectives, and repeat them again, what would you stress for us to understand?
First of all, you have a free and sovereign state right now. We continue to fight for our independence. if we're speaking about priorities and what we're expecting, first of all, it's of course preserving Ukrainian culture heritage in any means. It's not only materials, but it's also a work for digitalization of Ukrainian culture sphere. That's one of the main topics. We're looking now, apart from calculating damages and calculating the number of artifacts that were stolen from Ukrainian museums. Second one is support of Ukrainian artists and representative of culture sphere in Ukraine. Not only in countries where they're forced to live, including Sweden, but in Ukraine. We continue to work here right now, and we have limited resources for this. For these purposes, we have public foundation like Ukrainian Culture Fund. And third is, of course, fighting against disinformation, because it's the same weapon as Russians are using also in culture sphere, by the way, by promoting so-called Russian official culture representatives like Anna Netrebko on the stages in Europe. We need to put a quarantine on Russian official culture, because it's also a sort of the weapon when they are trying to present themselves in so-called good look, by good look.
Thank you very much for giving us these priorities. Could we also ask you, now that we have you online, to give us some points about the importance of culture right now for the Ukrainian society during the war? What role does culture play right now in Ukraine? If you would give us a glimpse of this role.
On the first days of full-scale invasion, I was in Ivano-Frankivsk, and the first thing we decided to do with local theatre is to continue creating performances and continue running the theatre. And they started to do the second week of the war underground in shelter. Just in the mid of March, Ukrainian theaters in Kiev also started to make some performances, and fully was opened at the end of March. So the need to show to Ukrainian citizens that culture stands behind on the same culture front as our Ukrainian soldiers and many civilians is quite important, because it encourages people. It shows for what they are fighting. They are fighting for our identity, which Russians want to ruin by targeting our museums, as it happened in Skоворodinovka or Ivankiv, by denying Ukrainian history, language and culture heritage achievements.
We have a question from Susanna Pettersson, the Director General of the National Museum of Sweden.
Yes, and thank you very much for the presentation. Wise words that we all heard from you. Now, you said that supporting Ukrainian artists in Ukraine is vital, and I think that's something that would be really valuable for us to develop further in this panel discussion. The same goes for other, let's say, fields of working. I'm now referring to the discussions that we have had from the National Museum with our colleagues in Ukraine, when we have been sending evacuation materials to Ukrainian museums to help our colleagues to evacuate the collections on site. So I think that this is more like, this is not a question, it's more like a comment, that it's what we are talking about, the situation, the cultural heritage, the role of cultural heritage. It's very, very important that we could also understand the need that the everyday life needs to go on site, as we all know from the experiences from the Second World War. As an example, many of the cities that were bombed, they kept the museums and concert houses, culture houses open to people, to ensure that culture can play a role in war and crisis as well. So I just wanted to thank for the notion of supporting Ukrainian artists in Ukraine.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for understanding. And I want to underline also about Ukrainian culture, heritage items. We hold more than 12 million items in our museums. And probably it was not only the biggest robbing or stolen story since the Second World War, which happened in Ukraine, but the biggest evacuation. Hundreds of thousands of items were evacuated.
Thank you very much, and thank you for clarifying this. Would you like to give a last message to us who are listening to you right now?
Give us weapon, and support culture.
There is a question. Thank you. There is a question from the audience. Can we take one question? Yes.
One, because I need to run.
Yes, one question. It's not a question really to the Minister of Culture of Ukraine, but rather to Swedish institutions. But if you would reflect on this, Mr. Tkachenko.
We are open to any new forms of cooperation, ours of co-financing, as today can happen with an announcement of Film Fund. It will be also co-financed by some European countries and Ukraine. So any form will be, I can guarantee, we will be very quick if we are speaking about money to support Ukrainian culture in response.
Thank you very much for taking time in your schedule to talk to us, Mr. Tkachenko, and good luck with your important work. Greetings and support from us here in Stockholm. Thank you very much. The question you raised is really a question to the government of Sweden. We have no representative of the government on the panel right now. We have a representative of the opposition in parliament and of two authorities in Sweden. But the question of financial support and new corporations is actually a question to the Swedish government and should be posed in another forum maybe, or as an outtake from us here. And Amanda, maybe you as an opposition member in parliament could say something.
I can at least reflect a little bit about what was said then, because I think that I want to connect to what I said earlier, that I think we have to discuss in Sweden to increase our funding to Ukraine. And I mean, this can be done in different ways, of course. I mean, we have this, what you say in English, bilateral development aid, perhaps, yeah. And I think this is of course important. I'm thinking about can we look at the directives to that funding and see if we can specify it more towards cultural and culture heritage actions in Ukraine. That will be one perhaps solution to this. And also this that you mentioned, the Minister of Culture, to support artists directly in Ukraine. This is also about supporting the civil society and organizations working in Ukraine for both the freedom of speech and free culture. So, and perhaps this development aid funding is the right way of doing that. And I hope that the government right now are looking for how can you twist this a little bit further, because this is, as he mentioned, this is a really important thing right now to support Ukrainians and give them hope for future, and also that we have to have something to preserve for the future also.
Thank you, Amanda, for this. Anastasia.
I would like to add that we right now losing expertise of museum experts. Because part of them right now in the army, the military guys, part of them have fled abroad, and they right now is working in different EU countries' museums, and we grateful for this opportunity for them and for support of them. But Ukrainian museum field is going to be facing a great challenge to rebuild Ukrainian, not just museums like it's Kovradinovka, for example, but I mean Ukrainian museum field as a whole. How we should rethink our museum exhibition, how we should rethink Soviet myth that used to be in our exhibition. And also how we just right now, we're thinking about how we should show this is war, because no one has not experienced to talk about another great war after the Second World War, and it's also a huge challenge. And about museum experts, for us, it's another task, crucial task, how we should to support financially museum experts in temporary occupied territory, because they depend on us, and how we should to support our museum experts who have fled on the other Ukrainian territories, that they also to have chance to continue their work in museums. We should support effective museum teams like in Art Arsenal, because we just right now we continue our works. We do some exhibition projects, and early April it's going to be exhibition project in Tallinn in Estonia, and we also do a program for children, for adults, and it's very popular for Ukrainian right now. So this is task for us really crucial.
Thank you, Anastasia, for stressing the peoples behind the museums and the museum workers again. Susanne.
Can I just ask you, if you can give us a list of priorities, what comes first, next, and third? If you should, it's people.
Because without people, nothing can happen. We can preserve our museum collection. We can digitalization of information of our museum collection.
And you mean on site? You need people, you need staff in Ukraine.
Yes, and yes. We should to support them, to give them this opportunity to continue their work.
Bogdan, from your perspective, if you would respond to the same question, what are the priorities?
I would stress 2 points in the speech of our minister. It's strange, I'm not the representative of the Minister of Culture of Ukraine, but you can see that it was 2 points that are the same in his official statement and in my private speech. First one, we are struggling for not only for our lives here, of course, but we are struggling for our cultures, because the culture is a very important part of our identity. And the Russians, they want to kill us, and they want to kill our identity and our history and our culture. That's why, for example, this Skovoroda, sometimes we told, this one is a philosopher, Ukrainian philosopher.
It was sorry. This is museum was destroyed from Russia missiles. This made this previous year 2022, and this is great philosopher Ukrainian Skovoroda.
And I was in this museum after destruction, and you should see that, because it's a small building, and the big territory. There is nothing at all there. Yeah, only this museum. So the rocket came to destroy this museum. Yeah? So the first point, we are struggling for our culture, because our culture is the important part of our identity. And the Russians do know that, and they destroyed our culture, our museums, our university, libraries, and so on. And the second point, also by the statement, the official statement of our minister, that what should we do? We are all of us in Ukraine and in free world. I think we should change our attitude to the so-called Russian culture. First of all, we should understand that the modern Russian aggressive politics against Ukraine and against all world is deeply rooted in the so-called Russian culture. And the great illusion that Putin is here and Pushkin is here. It was my idea, it was a very important point in the statement of our minister. And the second one, if you want to support the Ukrainian culture, the modern Ukrainian culture, you shouldn't support the modern Russian culture. This case about Netrebko, I said about this terrible lady who support Putin and this terrorist on our territory, and the state statement by our minister. So if you want to support us, it's not enough to support us. It's very important to understand that all Russian artists are also the weapon of Russian Empire.
If we stress the last question I asked to the minister about the importance of culture to the Ukrainian, the population in Ukraine right now that are in different, I mean, depending on proximity to the front, in different ways experiencing this war as a direct threat, as power cuts, as changes of daily life, as the influx of internal refugees, as the changing of priorities and budgets in the administration of the country. I would just like to say that I was moderating an EU conference in Umeå, a EU presidency conference on Thursday and Friday, and we had with us Alessia Marchunets-Isayenko, a film director from Ukraine, and she was stressing the importance of continuous film production, the continuous film screening, the theaters being active and playing, and also showing that, of course, in some cities closer to the Russian shelling, it's of danger to go to the cinemas, and people still decide to go to the cinemas to see screenings. And I would just like to ask our Ukrainian participants here of some other personal reflections, maybe also for you as individuals, of the importance of an ongoing, strong, active cultural life in Ukraine right now as part of the resilience to this war.
In our art arsenal, we had first after February museum project. It was in May 2022, and it was quite small and very, spontaneous initiative, but it was so popular from inhabitants of Kiev. It was, I think it was huge amounts of visitors. Even you should remember that in May, not whole inhabitants to come in Kiev, but it was so popular. And visitors to come to us, and they were so grateful that they have opportunity to reflect on their feelings and to express them.
Vakhtang, would you like to? What would you like to add?
My personal experience. I have a lot different experiences in Ukraine during this terrible year, but about the culture, I was many times in Kharkiv in this year. We are bringing the cars for our military from Europe and to Kharkiv, and then to the front line. But at the same time, we are taking part in the different cultural events. And many of them in Kharkiv, it's 5th Kharkiv, it's a great festival. It was organized in September in underground, because it was dangerous upstairs. The Kharkiv was totally in blackout, so it was absolutely dark there. Yeah? And it was really dangerous to go because it was shelling every day. Yeah? And I was surprised how many people came to do this festival in the underground. And we discussed it with them, and they said it's very important for us to hear your discussions, to hear their different presentations, music, and also it was organized by Literature Museum in Kharkiv, and Sergei Zhadan, you know, it's our famous writer and singer, and all these people in Kharkiv, they say that it's very important. The culture, it's not only the question of entertainment. It's yes, I said it's a very important part of our identity, and it's a very important support for all these people who live near the front line. Because when you are there, you understand how important to feel that the normal life exists. The normal life of the culture, the literature, music, philosophy, literature, and so on and so on. Yeah. And for example, I met some theater director in Kherson and Mykolaiv. Yeah, it's near front line. From Kherson, you can see from the one bank of the river, the Dnipro. You can see another where the Russian troops are, and they shelling from that bank, the Kherson till now. But we were in theater, in the museum and in the library. We were talking to these people, and they say the same issue, the same attitude, the same position. We are fighting not only for our lives, the culture, theater, literature, painting, philosophy is very important for us. Without it, it's for what we are fighting. Yeah, we are fighting for that. We need that, and we need culture to feel that we're alive.
Sorry,
thank you very much for adding this. Yes.
That in this festival and also before participate not only Zhadan, but you mentioned Museum of Literature, and I want to name of director of this museum. It's Tatiana Polipchuk, who actually during this wartime preserved these museums all this time, and together with her and another participants and team, we also were in this Kovaradinivka in this May of 2022 with team to actually estimate to this destruction. So I think the people the most important, of course.
Before we take a round of, I think, closing remarks from everyone, I would just like to ask you also about children's culture, because we know that children is one of the most vulnerable groups during this war, and we know that very large efforts are made to maintain culture for children during this war. Would you like to add something from this perspective?
Yeah, also about my conference t-shirt. It's a school for art school for children from Kharkiv, in picture, and it's called, very difficult for me, art school Nizimaza, something like that. And this is actually chief of this art school for children. They doing some workshops and so on for kids underground in Kharkiv, also from February. And our museums in Ukraine, they also continue to create programs for kids.
Thank you. I just wanted to just put this perspective on the table as well, because it's a very important part of maintaining some kind of normality within this atrocity that the Russian war in Ukraine is. I would like then, because our time is soon up, but I would like us to summarize and some takeouts that and some reflections that we have with us, maybe after listening to our Ukrainian guests, after listening to the Minister of Culture of Ukraine, What are we taking with us into the future discussions in our different environments on how the Swedish cultural life, cultural institutions and politicians can support artists and cultural institutions in Ukraine? Susanne?
I can start. I take with me from this discussion three things. The first is that I think that international cooperation is extremely important. Through UNESCO, through EU, and through ICOM, the International Center for Preservation and Restoration. I also think that what you said about staff, you need staff, that is something we listen to. That is, it's hard, but maybe we can contribute by, fundraising. There's also private fundraising and so on. And a third aspect that I take with me is what the Minister of Culture said regarding the digitalization, and as I also mentioned, to document by 3D scanning these specific medias. So thank you so much.
Susanne?
Yeah, I would take three key words, one being together, second being future, and third being resilience. This is a marathon. We need long-term commitment. I'm also a very hands-on person, so I'm sort of building on what you said earlier, that people are needed, museum professionals are needed, and I'm wondering if the following could work. First, inventory of the key skills needed on site now and in the future, and that's probably something that ICOM Ukraine, together with museums, could do, and probably you already have the answers. Then, question for us here in Sweden is related to the funding, whether government, together with other stakeholders, could make sure that there will be a sufficient amount of funds that Sweden could commit for sending X amount of expertise on annual basis during the, let's say, 5 next years to Ukraine, to make sure that there's a long-term commitment, and then we should build a program around that. Coordination of this kind of work could happen in collaboration with ICOM Ukraine and UNESCO, which is now, I'm reading the mail I got from the UNESCO last night. In the area of capacity building, UNESCO will soon be launching the Culture Hub in Lviv as a center for capacity building for culture professionals. So that's probably also a way to channel the funds to right places, as an idea.
Thank you very much for being this concrete. Amanda?
Thank you very much, and I'm going to take this concrete approach also with me. I'm thinking, first of all, how important it is that we, as politicians, as member of the parliament, and also, of course, for the representatives of the government, that we are continuing to acknowledge this situation in Ukraine and the situation for Ukrainian artists, both here in Sweden and in Ukraine. I'm thinking about how can I do to, perhaps there's more need of highlighting these in the parliament in different ways. You have, as opposition, you have a tool that you can ask questions to the minister, and you can force her to come to the parliament and answer that questions. And this is important because it's a way of also taking action. I know that we have lots of parliaments that are engaged in the situation in Ukraine, and I will discuss with them if we can have like a similar seminar discussing these things in the parliament. But then I would think it's so important that the government right now evaluate both the actions that has been taken right now for both the artists here in Sweden, as I mentioned. I mean, this is as you said, this is a marathon. It's not like a 100-meter race. You have to see that this is. I heard a really terrifying story last day from a Ukrainian artist talking about maybe now, perhaps it was from one of your seminars. Perhaps I cannot continue with my art now because I have to work. I have to perhaps take job and cleaning a hotel or something because I have to support my family. I have to, of course, I understand that, but I think we should do more here in Sweden to make these voices of culture vivid here, because it's important for us here in Sweden and for those voices to reach out also to Ukraine. And then as a third point here, that the government also need to see. Are there any decisions that has to be taken for like you from the authorities that you can do what you must do? Are there any like bureaucratic boundaries that can be fixed? Then we have to evaluate that now, and we have to prepare for these long-term actions. And then perhaps we need more funding, look to the budget this spring, see what can be done in the financial aid systems, and of course Creative Europe and the voice in EU. Sweden have to be this strong voice now when we have also the share in EU. So I will take with me these different perspectives and see how I, as a part of the opposition, can put these things forward.
Anastasia, maybe not so much outtakes for our Ukrainian participants, but some final reflections from you.
First, can you show, please, pictures that's there? Okay. I would like to assume from our international cooperation. Of course, it's crucial. Without this cooperation, nothing can happen. And we're very grateful for whole material and supply aid, and that for support of our museum professional. We're really grateful for this. And the other hand, from international cooperation, for example, we complete red list that you mentioned for Ukrainian culture heritage at risk, and we assumed that we also, not only in Ukraine, but we are facing in also huge challenge to rebuild architecture of protection monument system, I mean globally, because I am sorry, but it doesn't work anymore. What can you do when the other side is out of your value and just ignore all this rule and law and conventions? So it's another just huge challenges that facing us. And also we are standing about how we build our future, the picture of our future. And I think that museums, they have to and can and have to play great role in this, to building this future and show us. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Vakhtang, some final reflections from you.
Probably I can say just that I'm very grateful for all people who are here for their organization of this conference festival of UkraineVision. And I think that is very important, this personal touch when we were together and we can discuss it. And it's also very important. I think I understand that it's dangerous to come to Ukraine, but I understand that it's very important for the people from Europe, from all over the world, to come to see this situation, these processes, because when you come to our country now, you understand better what does it mean to be in this situation. Yeah? But I cannot invite you, and I hope that I invite you, all of you, in the future. And so as I say, the culture it's a part of our identity, and it's a part of human being. Yeah? We are human being because we have the culture. So show must go on. We can't live without culture.
I'm very grateful I had the opportunity to moderate this panel. I myself work at the Stockholm Center for Eastern European Studies, part of the Institute for Foreign Affairs, and I am also taking part in the policy advice, the strategy formulation, and the analysis that serves the government offices in terms of Sweden's future support for the reconstruction of Ukraine, and also the acute support of Ukraine at the moment. And my personal reflection is that Ukraine was one of the largest recipients of Swedish reform support in the last decade, and Sweden was one of the largest grant givers in Europe to Ukraine. We invested a lot of money in trying to build infrastructure, the decentralization process of Ukraine, supporting civil society in Ukraine. But at the same time, and maybe it's typical for the way we have been thinking in Sweden, we didn't really support the cultural exchange with Ukraine. And in the moment when the war reached this full-scale phase a year ago, it was very obvious that we in Sweden didn't have enough understanding of Ukrainian history, of Ukrainian culture, to be able to support and react maybe to the extent that we could. And I'm very grateful that the Swedish public sphere, the Swedish cultural institutions, Swedish publishing houses, Swedish media outlets have done what they have could during this year to try to bridge this gap. And I hope that in the future, when we focus on the reconstruction of Ukraine, we will also not only reconstruct, but also strengthen and build the cultural exchange and the mutual cultural understanding between Sweden and Ukraine. So this would be my final outtake. And I'm very glad that you stayed with us for this final discussion of UkraineVision 2023. And thank you very much to the organizers for inviting us in.